The demolition crew had been working on the old wing of Mercy General Hospital for 3 days when they found it. Wedged behind a loose panel in what used to be the staff locker room covered in dust and time was a hospital badge with a photograph of a woman who had been missing for 22 years. Denise Washington, RN Employee ID 4471, hire date 03/15/1998. Detective Marcus Cole held the badge up to the fluorescent light, studying the face of the woman who had haunted his dreams for over 2 decades. Denise Washington had been 28 when she disappeared, her smile bright against the sterile white of her nursing uniform. Now, at 55, Marcus was finally holding a piece of evidence that might crack the case that had defined and destroyed his early career. "Sir?" Officer Janet Reeves approached cautiously. At 32, she had grown up hearing whispers about the Washington case, about how the department had failed a young black nurse who had simply vanished after her night shift. "The construction foreman wants to know if we need to halt the demolition." Marcus turned the badge over in his weathered hands. The metal was tarnished, but the plastic covering Denise's photo remained intact. Her eyes seemed to look directly at him, just as they had in every newspaper article, every missing person flyer, every sleepless night when he wondered what he could have done differently. "No," he said finally, "but I want every inch of this room photographed and processed, and I want the original case files on my desk within the hour." 22 years ago, Marcus had been a rookie detective, 33 years old and eager to prove himself. The Washington case had been his first major investigation, and his spectacular failure to solve it had earned him a reputation that followed him through every promotion, every commendation, every quiet moment when he thought he might finally be at peace with his past. The facts had seemed straightforward enough. Denise Washington, a dedicated pediatric nurse, had finished her shift at 7 a.m. on March 15, 2002. She had been seen by several colleagues walking to her car in the hospital parking lot. Her silver Honda Civic had been found 3 days later, abandoned on a rural road 20 miles outside the city. Keys still in the ignition, purse untouched, no signs of struggle. The official investigation had lasted 6 months. They had interviewed her family, her colleagues, her friends from church. They had examined her financial records, her phone records, her email account. They had searched the woods surrounding where her car was found, dragged 3 different ponds, and followed up on dozens of tips that led nowhere. The case had gone cold, filed away with the other mysteries that small city police departments accumulate like dust. But Marcus had never stopped thinking about it, never stopped feeling the weight of the Washington family's grief, never stopped believing that somewhere in the maze of evidence and testimony he had missed something crucial. Now, staring at Denise's badge, he felt the familiar mixture of hope and dread that had characterized his entire career. Evidence could be a gift or a curse, depending on where it led. The badge had been found in locker 247, according to the construction foreman. Marcus made his way through the debris-strewn corridor to what remained of the staff area. The lockers were old, the kind with combination locks that hospital workers had used for decades to store their personal belongings during shifts. Was this locker assigned to anyone specific? Marcus asked the hospital's current administrator, Dr. Patricia Hayes, who had been summoned to the scene. Dr. Hayes consulted her tablet, scrolling through employment records. According to our archives, Locker 247 was assigned to Robert Thornfield, a maintenance supervisor. He worked here from 1987 until his retirement in 2004. Marcus wrote the name in his notebook, though he already knew it. Robert Thornfield had been interviewed during the original investigation. He had been one of the last people to see Denise Washington alive, having encountered her in the hallway as she was leaving her shift. His alibi had been solid. He had been working an overnight maintenance shift with 2 other employees who had corroborated his story. But now, finding Denise's badge in his locker changed everything. The original case files arrived at Marcus's desk as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows of the police station. He spread them across his desk like a puzzle he had never quite managed to solve. Witness statements, phone records, financial documents, photographs of Denise's abandoned car, maps of the search areas, all of it as familiar to him as his own reflection. But he read through everything again, this time with the knowledge that Denise's badge had been hidden in Robert Thornfield's locker. What had seemed like routine testimony 22 years ago now took on new significance. Thornfield, Robert James, maintenance supervisor. Interviewed, March 18, 2002. Interviewing officer, Detective M. Cole. I seen her walking toward the parking lot around 7:15 a.m. She looked tired, like she always did after a long night shift. Said, "Good morning" to me. I said it back. She was a nice lady, always polite to the maintenance staff. Some of the other nurses, they'd walk right past you like you weren't even there. But not Denise. She treated everyone with respect. At the time, Marcus had noted Thornfield's apparent genuineness, his obvious distress at Denise's disappearance, but now he wondered if there had been something else in the man's demeanor, something he had been too inexperienced to recognize. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed the number for Thornfield's last known address. The phone rang 6 times before an elderly woman answered. "Hello? Is this the Thornfield residence?" "Yes, this is Martha Thornfield." "Mrs. Thornfield, this is Detective Marcus Cole with the City Police Department. I'm calling about your husband, Robert." There was a long pause. "Robert passed away 3 years ago. May I ask what this is about?" Marcus felt a familiar sinking sensation. Death had a way of complicating investigations, of taking potential answers to the grave. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Thornfield. I'm reopening an old case that your husband was involved in as a witness. Would it be possible for me to speak with you in person?" "I suppose so. But I don't know what help I can be." Robert never talked much about his work at the hospital. The Thornfield house sat on a quiet street lined with modest homes built in the 1960s. Martha Thornfield answered the door with the careful wariness of someone who had learned to be suspicious of unexpected visitors. At 78, she moved slowly but with purpose, leading Marcus into a living room that smelled of old furniture and lavender air freshener. "You said this was about Robert's work?" she asked, settling into a recliner that bore the permanent impression of long use. "Specifically about a nurse who disappeared in 2002, Denise Washington. Your husband was one of the last people to see her." Martha's expression didn't change, but Marcus noticed her hands tighten slightly on the arms of her chair. "I remember that case. It was in all the papers. Robert was very upset about it. He liked that girl, said she was one of the good ones. Did he ever mention anything unusual about that night? Anything that might not have come up in his interview with police?" "No, nothing like that." Martha's answer came quickly, too quickly. Robert was a simple man. He did his job, came home, watched his TV shows. He wasn't the type to get involved in other people's business. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Thornfield, I want to be honest with you. We found some evidence today that suggests your husband might have known more about Denise Washington's disappearance than he originally told us." The color drained from Martha's face. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "What kind of evidence?" "We found Denise's hospital badge hidden in your husband's locker." Martha closed her eyes, and Marcus saw 22 years of buried secrets weighing on her shoulders. When she opened them again, tears had gathered at the corners. "I wondered when someone would finally come asking the right questions," she said. Marcus waited, knowing that pushing too hard could cause her to retreat into silence. Experience had taught him that confessions came in their own time, in their own way. "Robert wasn't a bad man," Martha continued, "but he was weak, and when weak men get scared, they do stupid things." "What was he scared of?" "Losing his job, losing his pension, going to jail." She paused, seeming to gather her strength. "Losing me." Martha stood up slowly and walked to an old wooden cabinet in the corner of the room. She opened a drawer and pulled out a manila envelope, yellowed with age. "Robert made me promise to burn this after he died, but I couldn't do it. I kept thinking about that poor girl's family, about how they never got to know what happened to her." She handed the envelope to Marcus. Inside were 3 items: a handwritten letter, a photograph, and a small key. The letter was dated April 2, 2002, 2 weeks after Denise's disappearance. "Martha, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and you've decided to clean out my things. I need you to know the truth about what happened to Denise Washington, the nurse who disappeared. I've been carrying this burden for weeks now, and I can't take it anymore. I didn't hurt her. I want you to know that first and foremost. But I know who did, and I know why, and I've been too much of a coward to speak up. That night, I saw Denise walking to her car like I told the police, but what I didn't tell them was that I also saw Dr. Michael Brennan follow her out to the parking lot. Brennan was the chief of surgery, a man everyone respected. He'd been having an affair with Denise for about 6 months, and she had been threatening to tell his wife. I didn't think much of it at first. Doctors and nurses having affairs wasn't exactly uncommon at the hospital, but then I heard them arguing in the parking lot. Denise was saying she was tired of being his secret, that she deserved better. Brennan was trying to calm her down, but she was having none of it. I should have minded my own business. I should have gone home. But I watched from the loading dock as their argument got more heated. Denise started walking toward her car, and Brennan grabbed her arm. She pulled away and fell, hitting her head on the concrete. There was blood. Brennan panicked. He checked for a pulse, and I could see from his body language that she was dead. Then he looked around to make sure no one was watching. He didn't see me. What happened next makes me sick to think about. Brennan put Denise's body in the trunk of his car. He drove her car to that rural road where it was found and left it there. Then he came back to the hospital and finished his shift like nothing had happened. I confronted him the next day. I told him I had seen everything and that he needed to go to the police. He broke down and told me it was an accident, that he never meant for her to get hurt. But then he offered me money to keep quiet. A lot of money. Enough to pay off our mortgage and put something away for retirement. I took it, Martha. God help me, I took it. And I've been living with that decision ever since. Brennan buried Denise's body somewhere outside the city. He never told me where. Said it was better if I didn't know. But he gave me her hospital badge as insurance. Said if I ever tried to expose him, he would plant evidence to make it look like I was the one who killed her. I know I should have gone to the police anyway. I know I failed that girl and her family. But I was scared, and I was selfish, and I chose my own comfort over justice. The key in this envelope opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank, box number 1847. Inside, you'll find the money Brennan paid me and some documents that prove what I'm telling you is true. I'm sorry, Martha. I'm sorry for being weak, and I'm sorry for putting you in this position. But that girl deserves to have her story told, and her family deserves to know the truth. Do what you think is right. Robert Marcus read the letter twice, his hands trembling slightly. Martha watched him from her chair, tears streaming down her face. Doctor, Brennan retired about 5 years after Denise disappeared, she said quietly. Moved to Florida with his wife. For all I know, he's still there, living off his pension while that poor girl's family never got closure. Why didn't you come forward after Robert died? Marcus asked. Because I was a coward too. Because I was afraid of what people would think of me, of how they'd judge me for living off blood money all these years. She wiped her eyes with a tissue. But finding her badge changes things, doesn't it? It means someone's finally looking for the truth again. Marcus carefully placed the letter back in the envelope. Mrs. Thornfield, this information could be crucial to solving Denise's case. But I need to ask you to keep this conversation confidential while we investigate. Can you do that? Of course. I've kept this secret for 22 years. I can keep it a little longer if it means getting justice for that girl. As Marcus drove back to the station, his mind raced with the implications of Robert Thornfield's letter. If it was true, then Dr. Michael Brennan had not only killed Denise Washington, but had orchestrated an elaborate cover-up that had fooled the police for over 2 decades. But letters could be fabricated, and dead men couldn't be cross-examined. Marcus needed more than Robert Thornfield's confession to build a case that would hold up in court. He needed to verify the facts, follow the money trail, and hopefully find evidence that would lead him to Denise's body. The first step was checking the safety deposit box. First, National Bank had been a fixture in the downtown area for over a century. The safety deposit box area was in the basement, a windowless room filled with metal drawers of various sizes. Box 1847 was one of the smaller ones, requiring 2 keys to open, one held by the bank, one provided by the customer. Marcus presented the key from Martha Thornfield along with a search warrant he had obtained that morning. The bank manager, a nervous man in his 50s, accompanied him down to the vault. This box was rented by Robert Thornfield in March of 2002. The manager explained as they walked down the narrow hallway. The rental fees have been automatically deducted from his account every year since then. I believe his widow has been maintaining the account. The box contained exactly what Robert's letter had promised: a stack of cash totaling $50,000 and a manila folder containing documents. The money was mostly in hundreds. Some bills showing the wear of age, but all clearly authentic. But it was the documents that made Marcus's pulse quicken. Bank records showing a $50,000 withdrawal from Dr. Michael Brennan's personal account on March 20th, 2002, 5 days after Denise's disappearance. A handwritten note from Brennan that said, R. As discussed, this should be sufficient for your retirement planning. MB. And most damning of all, a photograph of Denise Washington and Dr. Brennan together at what appeared to be a restaurant, their body language suggesting intimacy. Marcus photographed everything with his phone, then sealed the items in evidence bags. The case was finally beginning to take shape, but he still needed to find Dr. Brennan and, if possible, locate Denise's body. A quick database search revealed that Dr. Michael Brennan, now 74 years old, was indeed living in Naples, Florida, in a waterfront condominium that suggested a comfortable retirement. Marcus called the Naples Police Department to request assistance with locating and questioning Brennan, but he knew that extradition procedures could take weeks or months. There was another approach, one that might yield faster results. Marcus decided to pay Brennan a visit himself. The flight to Naples took 3 hours, giving Marcus time to review the case files and plan his strategy. Confronting Brennan would be delicate work. He needed to elicit information without alerting the man to flee or destroy evidence. The key would be making Brennan believe that Marcus already knew more than he actually did. Before approaching Brennan's condominium, Marcus found himself standing on the beach, watching the sunset paint the Gulf of Mexico in shades of orange and pink. He thought about Denise Washington, about how she should have been able to see sunsets like this, should have had the chance to live the life that had been stolen from her. The weight of 22 years of injustice pressed down on him like the humid Florida air. If you were in his position, carrying the burden of an unsolved case for over 2 decades, how would you approach the man who might hold the key to finally bringing closure to a grieving family? Brennan's condominium was in an upscale complex called Pelican Bay, where the parking lots were filled with luxury cars and the landscaping was magazine perfect. Marcus knocked on the door of Unit 412, not knowing what to expect. The man who answered was tall and distinguished, with silver hair and the kind of tan that came from years of Florida living. But when he saw Marcus's badge, something shifted in his expression, a flicker of fear that was quickly suppressed. "Dr. Brennan, I'm Detective Marcus Cole from the police department up north. I wonder if I might have a few minutes of your time to discuss an old case." "Of course, Detective. Please come in." Brennan's voice was steady, but Marcus noticed a slight tremor in his hands as he led him into a living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. "Beautiful view," Marcus said, settling into a leather armchair. "Yes, my wife and I have been very happy here. Can I offer you something to drink? Coffee? Water?" "Water would be fine, thank you." Brennan disappeared into the kitchen, giving Marcus a chance to study the room. The walls were covered with medical degrees, awards, and photographs of Brennan with various dignitaries and colleagues. It was the home of a man who had been successful and respected, someone who had everything to lose. "Now then," Brennan said, returning with a glass of water, "what case did you want to discuss?" "The disappearance of Denise Washington in 2002. I believe you knew her." Brennan's composure didn't crack, but Marcus saw him swallow hard. "Yes, of course. Denise was one of our nurses. A lovely girl. Her disappearance was a tragedy that shook the entire hospital community." "I'm sure it did. You were interviewed during the original investigation, weren't you?" "Yes, I believe so, though I'm afraid I don't remember much about it. That was over 20 years ago." Marcus pulled out his notebook and flipped to a page he had prepared during the flight. "According to the records, you told the investigating officer that you barely knew Nurse Washington, that your interactions with her were limited to professional matters." "That's correct. Dr. Brennan, I want to show you something." Marcus pulled out a photocopy of the picture he had found in the safety deposit box. "This photograph was taken about 2 months before Denise disappeared. Would you care to explain the nature of your relationship with her?" The blood drained from Brennan's face. He stared at the photograph for a long moment, then slowly sank into his chair. "Where did you find this? That's not important right now. What's important is that you lied to police during a missing person investigation. That's obstruction of justice, Dr. Brennan. It's a serious felony." Brennan was quiet for nearly a minute, staring out at the water. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Marcus felt his heart rate increase, but he kept his voice steady. "What wasn't supposed to happen like that?" "Her death. It was an accident. I swear to you, Detective, it was an accident." The confession Marcus had been waiting 22 years to hear was finally coming. He activated the recording app on his phone and placed it on the coffee table between them. "Dr. Brennan, I need to advise you of your rights before we continue this conversation." "I know my rights, Detective." I also know that I'm a 74-year-old man who has been living with this guilt for over 2 decades. I'm tired of running from it. Marcus read him his Miranda rights anyway, and Brennan waived his right to an attorney. Then, as the sun set over the Gulf of Mexico, Dr. Michael Brennan began to tell the story of what had really happened to Denise Washington. I met Denise when she transferred to our pediatric unit in 2001. She was beautiful, intelligent, and had a way with the children that was remarkable. I was 52. My marriage had become routine, and I was flattered by her attention. So you began an affair? Yes. It started innocently enough. Coffee after difficult shifts, conversations about medicine and life, but it developed into something more intimate. We would meet at a hotel downtown, or sometimes at her apartment when she was off duty. What changed? Denise started talking about the future. She wanted me to leave my wife, wanted us to be together openly. She was tired of being a secret, tired of sneaking around. I tried to explain that it wasn't that simple, that I had a family, a reputation, a career to consider, but she wouldn't listen. Brennan stood up and walked to the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. The night she disappeared, she had cornered me in my office before her shift ended. She gave me an ultimatum. Either I announced our relationship publicly within a week, or she would tell my wife herself. I tried to reason with her, but she was determined. What happened in the parking lot? I followed her out, hoping to convince her to be patient, to give me more time to figure things out. But she was beyond reasoning. She said she had wasted enough time on me, that she deserved better than being someone's dirty secret. Brennan's voice broke slightly. I grabbed her arm, not to hurt her, just to make her stop and listen to me. But she jerked away, lost her balance, and fell backward. Her head struck the concrete with a sound I'll never forget. And she died instantly. I'm a doctor, detective. I knew immediately that she was gone. The injury was massive, unsurvivable. I panicked. I couldn't think clearly. All I could think about was my career, my family, my reputation. Everything I had worked for my entire life was about to be destroyed. So you moved her body. I put her in the trunk of my car and drove to a wooded area about 30 miles outside the city. I buried her there, then drove her car to that rural road and left it. I thought if her car was found abandoned, people would assume she had been abducted or had run away. Marcus leaned forward. Dr. Brennan, I need you to tell me exactly where you buried Denise's body. Brennan closed his eyes, and for a moment Marcus thought he might refuse to answer. Then he spoke, his voice hollow with 2 decades of guilt. There's a state forest preserve called Whitmore Woods, about 30 miles northeast of the city. If you take the main trail for about 2 miles, there's a smaller path that branches off to the left. Follow that for maybe half a mile until you reach a clearing with a large oak tree that's been split by lightning. She's buried about 50 yards east of that tree, near a cluster of pine saplings. Marcus wrote down the directions, his hands shaking slightly. After 22 years, he was finally going to be able to bring Denise home. What about Robert Thornfield? Marcus asked. Thornfield saw what happened. He confronted me the next day, said he had witnessed the whole thing from the loading dock. I was terrified. I offered him money to keep quiet, and he accepted. I thought that would be the end of it, but he kept asking for more over the years. Small amounts, but regular payments. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare that would never end. Did you know that Thornfield kept evidence of your arrangement? What kind of evidence? Bank records, photographs, a detailed confession letter. Brennan's legs seemed to give out, and he sank back into his chair. I should have known. I should have gone to the police myself years ago. Maybe if I had, things would have been different. Dr. Brennan, I need to ask you to return with me to face charges in Denise's death. Of course. I've been waiting for this day for 22 years. In some ways, it's a relief. The flight back north seemed longer than the journey to Florida. Marcus found himself thinking about the Washington family, about how they would react to finally learning the truth about Denise's fate. Part of him wondered if some secrets were better left buried, if the pain of knowing the truth might be worse than the uncertainty they had lived with for so long. But then he remembered Denise's photograph on her hospital badge, the bright smile of a young woman who had deserved so much better than the life she had been given. How do you tell a family that their daughter, sister, aunt was killed over a man's cowardice and pride? The search team found Denise Washington's remains exactly where Dr. Brennan had said they would be. She was buried in a shallow grave, her bones wrapped in what appeared to be medical scrubs from the hospital. The forensic examination confirmed what Brennan had confessed: blunt force trauma to the head consistent with a fall onto concrete. Marcus stood at the edge of the gravesite as the forensic team carefully excavated the remains. 22 years of decomposition had reduced Denise to bones and fragments of clothing, but to Marcus she was still the vibrant young woman whose disappearance had haunted his dreams. "Detective Cole? Doctor?" Sarah Manning, the forensic anthropologist, approached him with a small evidence bag. "We found this with the remains." Inside the bag was a small gold cross on a chain, tarnished but intact. Marcus remembered that Denise's mother had mentioned during the original investigation that her daughter never went anywhere without her cross, a confirmation gift from their church. "This should help with positive identification," Dr. Manning said gently. "I know this case has been important to you for a long time." Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. After 22 years, Denise Washington was finally coming home. The arrest of Dr. Michael Brennan made national news. The story of a respected surgeon who had killed his lover and covered it up for over 2 decades captured public attention in a way that the original missing person case never had. Brennan was charged with second-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and tampering with evidence. Despite his age and health issues, the district attorney announced that the state would seek the maximum sentence allowed by law. But for Marcus, the most important part of the resolution was yet to come. He had to face the Washington family and tell them the truth about what had happened to Denise. The Washington family had never left the city. Denise's mother, Gloria, now 73, still lived in the same small house where she had raised her children. Her brother James had become a successful lawyer, and her sister Patricia worked as a teacher. They had never stopped hoping that someday they would learn what had happened to Denise. Marcus sat in Gloria Washington's living room, surrounded by photographs of Denise at various stages of her life: graduation from nursing school, family gatherings, church events. The room was a shrine to a life cut short, maintained by a mother who had never stopped believing her daughter would come home. "We found her," Marcus said simply. "We found Denise." Gloria Washington closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them, tears were streaming down her face, but her voice was steady. "Tell me everything." Marcus told them about the badge found in the locker, about Martha Thornfield's confession, about the evidence in the safety deposit box, and about Dr. Brennan's admission of guilt. He told them about the affair, about the argument in the parking lot, about the accidental fall that had ended Denise's life. He told them about the cover-up, about the bribery, about the cowardice that had kept the truth buried for 22 years. When he finished, the room was silent except for the ticking of an old clock on the mantelpiece. James Washington, now a successful attorney in his 50s, was the first to speak. "All these years we thought she might have been kidnapped, or worse. In some ways, knowing it was an accident makes it easier to bear. But knowing that man let us suffer for 22 years, let us wonder and hope and grieve without answers, that's unforgivable," Patricia added, her voice hard with anger. Gloria Washington reached for Marcus's hand. Her fingers were thin and weathered, but her grip was strong. "Detective Cole, I want to thank you for never giving up on Denise. I know this case has been a burden for you all these years. I could see it in your eyes every time you came to update us, every time you had to tell us there was no new information. But you never stopped looking for her, and that means everything to our family." "I'm sorry it took so long," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry I couldn't solve it sooner." "You solved it when you were supposed to solve it," Gloria replied. "God's timing isn't always our timing, but it's always perfect timing. Denise can finally rest in peace, and so can we." The funeral of Denise Washington was held on a bright Saturday morning in October, exactly 22 years and 7 months after her disappearance. The church was packed with people who had known her, people who had searched for her, people who had been touched by her story. Marcus sat in the back, feeling like an intruder on the family's grief, but Gloria Washington had insisted he be there. "You brought our girl home," she had said. "You belong here." The service was a celebration of Denise's life rather than a mourning of her death. Her colleagues from the hospital spoke about her dedication to her young patients, her kindness to everyone she met, her bright smile that could light up the darkest room. Her family shared memories of her childhood, her dreams of becoming a nurse, her plans for the future that had been cut short. At the end of the service, Gloria Washington approached the podium to speak about her daughter one last time. "Denise was taken from us by a man's selfishness and cowardice," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the church. "But she was returned to us by the dedication and perseverance of people who refused to let her be forgotten." "Detective Cole," Martha Thornfield, and so many others who kept looking for the truth. They are the reason we can finally say goodbye to our daughter with peace in our hearts." She paused, looking out at the congregation. Denise always believed that truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. She was right. The truth about what happened to her has finally come to light, and now she can rest in the arms of the Lord she served so faithfully. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he listened to Gloria Washington's words. 22 years of guilt, of wondering if he had failed Denise and her family, began to lift from his shoulders. He had solved the case, brought the killer to justice, and given the Washington family the closure they had desperately needed. But more than that, he had learned something about the nature of justice itself. It didn't always come quickly or easily. Sometimes it required decades of persistence, of refusing to give up even when the trail seemed cold. Sometimes it came through unexpected discoveries, through the courage of people who chose to do the right thing, even when it was difficult. As the congregation filed out of the church, Marcus found himself thinking about all the other unsolved cases sitting in filing cabinets across the country, all the other families waiting for answers that might never come. He thought about the responsibility that came with carrying a badge, with making promises to victims and their families that justice would be served. In that moment, he felt the weight of his calling more clearly than ever before. Like Marcus, we all have the power to seek truth and fight for justice, even when the path is long and difficult. What unsolved mysteries in your own life deserve the same persistence and dedication? Dr. Michael Brennan pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. At 74, it was likely to be a life sentence. He showed little emotion during the hearing, but his attorney read a statement expressing remorse for his actions and asking for the Washington family's forgiveness. Robert Thornfield was posthumously charged with obstruction of justice and accessory after the fact, charges that would have carried significant prison time had he lived to face them. Martha Thornfield returned the $50,000 in blood money to the Washington family, who used it to establish a scholarship fund in Denise's name for nursing students from underprivileged backgrounds. Marcus Cole was promoted to chief of detectives 6 months after solving the Washington case. In his acceptance speech, he talked about the importance of persistence in police work, about never giving up on victims or their families, about the responsibility that came with seeking justice for those who could no longer seek it for themselves. But perhaps the most important change was in Marcus himself. The guilt that had plagued him for 22 years was finally gone, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and dedication to his work. He had learned that justice wasn't always swift, but it was always worth pursuing. On the first anniversary of finding Denise's badge, Marcus returned to the site where Mercy General Hospital had once stood. The old building had been demolished, replaced by a modern medical complex that bore little resemblance to the place where Denise Washington had spent her final living moments. But a small memorial garden had been created near the entrance, with a plaque that read, "In memory of all the dedicated healthcare workers who have served this community with compassion and courage." Marcus stood before the memorial, thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. 22 years of carrying the weight of an unsolved case, of facing the Washington family's grief and his own sense of failure, of wondering if justice would ever be served. He pulled out his phone and called Gloria Washington. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar. "Detective Cole, how are you? I'm standing at the memorial where the hospital used to be," he said. "I wanted you to know that I'm thinking about Denise today." "That's very kind of you. We're doing well, all things considered. The scholarship fund has helped 3 young women start nursing school this year. Denise would be so proud." "She would be," Marcus agreed. "Mrs. Washington, I want you to know that working on Denise's case changed my life. It taught me that some battles are worth fighting for decades, that some promises are worth keeping no matter how long it takes. And it taught me that there are still good people in this world who won't give up on what's right." Gloria replied, "Denise is resting in peace because of you, detective. Never forget that." After ending the call, Marcus remained at the memorial for a few more minutes. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garden, and he could hear the sounds of the city continuing its daily rhythm around him. Somewhere in that city, other families were dealing with their own mysteries, their own losses, their own searches for truth. Marcus thought about the young detectives who would follow in his footsteps, who would inherit their own cold cases and impossible puzzles. He hoped they would learn what he had learned, that justice wasn't just about solving crimes, but about honoring the memory of victims, about giving families the closure they desperately needed, about refusing to let the guilty escape consequences simply because time had passed. As he walked back to his car, Marcus reflected on the lessons the Washington case had taught him. He had learned that evidence could surface in the most unexpected places, that confessions sometimes came from the most unlikely sources, that the truth had a way of surviving even when powerful people tried to bury it. He had also learned about the corrosive effects of guilt, both on those who carried it willingly and those who had it thrust upon them. Robert Thornfield had lived with the knowledge of his complicity for decades, and it had eaten away at him like a cancer. Dr. Brennan had tried to build a new life on top of his crime, but the foundation had been rotten from the beginning. But perhaps most importantly, Marcus had learned about forgiveness, the kind that Gloria Washington had shown him when she absolved him of his perceived failures, the kind that the Washington family had somehow found for the man who had killed their daughter, the kind that he had finally been able to show himself after carrying 22 years of guilt. The Washington case became something of a legend in the police department, a reminder that cold cases were never truly cold as long as there were detectives willing to keep working them. Marcus began teaching a seminar for young investigators called The Long View of Justice, where he shared the lessons he had learned from his decades-long pursuit of the truth. His favorite piece of advice was simple. Every victim deserves a voice, and every family deserves answers. Sometimes it takes years to provide them, but that doesn't make them any less important. In your career, you'll face cases that seem impossible to solve, mysteries that appear to have no answers. But remember that justice isn't bound by time limits or statute of limitations when it comes to murder. What matters is that you never stop fighting for the truth, no matter how long it takes. One evening, 3 years after Denise's case was solved, Marcus was cleaning out his desk when he found an old photograph from the original investigation. It showed the search team combing through the woods near where Denise's car had been found, their faces grim with determination. In the background, barely visible, was a younger version of himself, his hair darker, his face less lined, but his eyes already carrying the weight of responsibility he would bear for the next 2 decades. He studied the photograph for a long moment, remembering that hopeful, frustrated young detective who had been so certain he could solve any case if he just worked hard enough. That young man had been both right and wrong. Right that hard work and determination mattered. Wrong that they were always enough on their own. Marcus had learned that solving cases sometimes required patience more than intelligence, persistence more than skill, and faith more than evidence. He had learned that justice operated on its own timeline, revealing its secrets when the time was right, rather than when investigators demanded answers. The photograph went into his wallet, a reminder of how far he had come and how much he had learned. Somewhere in the city, other detectives were working their own impossible cases, carrying their own burdens of unsolved mysteries. Marcus hoped they would remember that every cold case file contained a real person who had been loved, missed, and mourned. Every victim deserved to have their story told, their killer brought to justice, their family given closure. As Marcus prepared to leave the office that night, his phone rang. It was a young detective from the next county, calling about a case that had gone cold 15 years earlier. A missing college student whose car had been found abandoned, whose family had never stopped hoping for answers. "Detective Cole," the young officer said, "I've heard about your work on the Washington case. I was wondering if you might have some advice for working a long-term missing person investigation." Marcus smiled, settling back into his chair. "I have all the time in the world," he said. "Tell me about your victim." As he listened to the details of another young life cut short, another family searching for closure, Marcus felt the familiar mixture of sadness and determination that had driven him for his entire career. The work was hard, sometimes heartbreaking, often frustrating, but it was also necessary, honorable, and occasionally miraculous. He thought about Denise Washington, about the badge that had waited 22 years to tell its story, about the family that had never given up hope for answers. He thought about all the other cases sitting in filing cabinets across the country, waiting for their moment of revelation, their chance for justice. "Let's start from the beginning," Marcus said into the phone, pulling out a fresh notebook. "Tell me everything you know about when she disappeared." Outside his office window, the city lights twinkled like stars, each one representing lives being lived, stories being written, mysteries waiting to be solved. Marcus Cole, veteran detective and seeker of truth, settled in for another long conversation about justice delayed but not denied. The badge of Denise Washington now rested in the evidence room, officially closed case material that would be preserved for posterity. But her real memorial lived on in the scholarship fund that bore her name, in the young nurses who would follow in her footsteps, in the reminder that every victim's life had value and every family's grief deserved acknowledgement. Marcus had learned that justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about truth, about memory, about ensuring that those who had been lost were never forgotten. It was about keeping promises to the dead and bringing peace to the living. It was about the badge that waited 22 years to tell its story, and the detective who never stopped listening for its voice. 22 years after Denise Washington vanished after her night shift, her badge had finally brought her home, and in doing so, it had taught everyone involved that truth, like love, transcends time. Some mysteries may seem unsolvable, but they are never truly hopeless as long as there are people willing to seek justice, no matter how long the journey may take. Marcus locked his office door and headed home, knowing that tomorrow would bring new cases, new mysteries, new families searching for answers. But tonight he would sleep peacefully, knowing that Denise Washington's story had finally been told. Her killer had faced justice, and her family had found the peace they had sought for over 2 decades. The badge had kept its secrets for 22 years, but in the end, the truth had prevailed. In Marcus Cole's experience, it almost always did.